of green bags and on behalf of the S.J. Quinney College of Law as well. A couple of upcoming events to announce. Our speaker this afternoon is giving a different talk tonight at the Natural History Museum of Utah on humanity's evolving relationship to the ocean as the keynote kickoff address for the Revaluing the Ocean conference. Again, that's at 6:30 at the Natural History Museum of Utah, free and open to the public. On March 21st to 22nd, we will be holding our 24th annual Wallace Stegner Symposium. Topic will be recreational challenges on public lands. And Sally Jewell, the former Secretary of the Interior under the Obama administration, will join us as the keynote speaker. Registration for that event is now open, and please register by March 8th for a discount. Some miscellaneous announcements. We are joined today by the King's English Bookshop out in the lobby, who has Jeremy Jackson's books, including and especially Breakpoint, which he's talking about today. He'll be happy to sign them after his presentation. There's a sign-up sheet going around, theoretically, so please sign up so we can let you know of future events. Please, if you've not already done so, silence your cell phone. After the talk, we should have some time for questions. We've got microphones up here in front that we ask you to use so that the questions, A, can be heard by everybody else in the room, and B, will end up on the recording. We have some people who are participating offline, off campus, who will be participating by Slido. In terms of sponsorships, we'd very much like to thank the Cultural Vision Fund, which has provided funding for this lecture, as well as our other Stegner lectures, our Young Scholar Program, and our annual symposium. We're deeply indebted to the Cultural Vision Fund for its support. All right, so I now have the great pleasure of introducing our speaker this afternoon, Jeremy Jackson, Professor of Oceanography Emeritus at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography and Senior Scientist Emeritus at the Smithsonian Institution. He has studied numerous things, the threats and solutions to human impact on the ocean and the ecology of the tropical seas. He's the author of over 160 scientific publications and 11 books. He's a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and has received numerous prizes and awards, including the BBVA International Prize in Ecology and Conservation, the Paleontological Medal, and the Darwin Medal of the International Society for Reef Studies. He has been working on the collapse of coastal ecosystems, which was chosen by Discover magazine as the outstanding scientific achievement of 2001. But he is here today to talk to us about his brand new book, Breakpoint, Reckoning with America's Environmental Crisis. Thank you.
Ooh, excuse me here. Thank you all for being here. It's really fun to come. This is only the second time in my life that I've ever been to Salt Lake, so it's a new experience. I'm an ecologist and a geologist, and I started out as an academic doing the sorts of things that all of us academics really like to do, not really worrying about whether or not what I was doing was of any practical value whatsoever, but doing it only because it was fascinating and it gave me pleasure. I'm 76 years old, and within the 55 years of my scientific career, I've watched changes that have been so profound that they've really changed the focus of what I do. And I still dabble in science, but mostly I'm a hellraiser and try to be a public scientist about environmental issues that I think are profound and deep and all the rest. It's a very strange and sort of lonely trip in a way, because if you've watched the changes that have occurred and you see where they're going, it's sort of hard to walk a tightrope line between being sort of too positive and too negative. And this book that I'm going to talk about is my latest attempt, along with a journalist, Steve Chapple, to try to achieve that. We set out on this book because of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. And Steve, who is a journalist, wanted to write a book about the spill. And I said, Steve, that's a really dumb thing to do because there'll be 6 of them and you're slow. And so you won't get the first book. And besides, it's the tragedy of the oil spill, bad as it was, is that it really isn't the tragedy of the Gulf of Mexico. It's sort of a distraction from the deeper and more profound problems that we face that began a century ago and all the rest. And so this book evolved from that conversation. It was a lot of fun. For me, scientifically, the reason I chose to join him in this project is that I've been worried for a really long time that even the scientific community tends to think of things like climate change or the apocalypse as something in the far distant future. And the IPCC, which is, as I'm sure you all know, this heroic group of scientists who in a series of meetings and conferences have documented the impacts of climate change and projected those impacts into the future, are as guilty of this as anybody else, in that all of the results really have been presented in terms about how horrible the world's going to be in 2100 when we're all going to be dead. And so, you know, it's just so easy when you're a soccer mom taking your kids to school, or you just got a job or whatever, to, oh yeah, that's in 2100 and it doesn't affect me. But the reality is, and I'm going to talk about that in this talk in just a second, is that the breakpoint is now. It's happening now. And if you just reflect, and I'll come back to this, on the summer of 2017 and the origin of the firestorms of the West that are here forever, and the drought which is here forever, and the 3 hurricanes in the Atlantic, which is a situation that is here forever. And then you say, well, oh my God, why didn't they tell me this? Because climate change is now, these environmental problems are now, they are not something in the distant future, and we better wake up about it. Okay, so, what did I do? Is it there? Great, okay. So what I'm going to do, the way this book was written is it started out as a teenage fantasy road trip. You know, it's really easy to pontificate as a scientist in the ivory tower about what's wrong with the world and you stupid people, you ought to fix this, right? But what we thought we'd do is we spent 3 years going up and down the Mississippi River, talking to corn farmers, soybean farmers, oil and gas people, fishermen, you name it, and just finding out first of all, what we saw firsthand, and finding out what people thought about it. And then after that, we came back and we dug into the science and went into future prospects. Now that's the structure of the book, and you will be relieved to know I'm not going to go through the whole book. What I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight 3 categories of problems, and they're just exemplars of many. And I'm going to do it in terms of things that are fixable, things that are pretty bad but adaptable to, and the things that are just holy shit, they are really bad, and we're just going to have to accommodate that. So the first thing, which really it's just so dumb we still do this, is modern industrial agriculture. 2/3 of all the corn, the soy, the cotton that are grown in this country are Roundup Ready, genetically modified organisms. And you know, actually I'm not anti-GMO and all the rest of it, but I sure as hell am anti-GMO of crops that require being drowned in poison in order to survive and grow. And that's what we do. So what do we get out of this? And that is, of course, what Iowa looks like. Okay, so what do we get? That's the poison, Roundup. We're getting a lot of soil erosion, massive amounts of soil erosion. Iowa, at the rate soil is eroding in Iowa, will have no topsoil in 50 to 70 years. It's just going, gone. We have nutrient runoff. That little pipe, that quaint little pipe, is at the end of tiles. Probably most of you know what tiles are. People in the East, they don't have a clue what tiling is. But tiling, it's called that because the Romans discovered over 2,000 years ago that if you put a lot of clay pipes with holes in them under your fields, the soil drained really well and the crops grew well. Well, now we make those tiles out of PVC pipe. There are 500,000 miles of tiles under Iowa fields. And in the Corn Belt, there are about 3 or 4 million miles of tiles. And they all come out at little openings like the one you see in the picture, loaded with all the excess nitrogen, Roundup, toxins, you name it, that were dumped on the field, and they go into brooks, and then they go into rivers and all the rest. And they cause pollution. And the picture in the lower right, that's Lake Erie. That is a cyanobacterial bloom in Lake Erie. Illinois and Iowa and Indiana and a lot of other places get their drinking water from Lake Erie. The cyanobacteria that cause that algal bloom are highly toxic. You can't filter it out. And in Iowa, in many districts of Iowa today, they are spending more than $1,000 per person per year to make their drinking water safe to drink. And you may remember when the water supply of Toledo was closed down for several days, because in the lower left there, where that Ohio City is, there was a toxic bloom right on top of their water intake, and so they just had no fresh water in the city. And then in the lower left, that's superweeds. Remember Rachel Carson told us in 1962 what happens when you drown mosquitoes in DDT? They evolve resistance to DDT. Well, if you drown weeds in Roundup, you evolve weeds that are resistant. Those weeds that are a lot taller than the guy are about 4 or 5 weeks old. They invade fields, they destroy crops, and like, duh, didn't we know this was going to happen because Carson told us about it so long ago. So what do we get for that? I mean, Iowa is really, playing a big gamble there. They're losing their soil, they're polluting their water, they're spending all that money. These damn superweeds are coming in, and it just doesn't look very good. So there must be something really good, right? Well, so we get ethanol. The major product of the corn is the ethanol we don't need. It's an inferior fuel. And if you're going to make ethanol, you sure as hell shouldn't make it from corn. We do get hogs, which taste good but aren't exactly healthy. Oh, they all go, by the way, to China and Russia and whatever. We get high fructose corn syrup, and we get the obesity epidemic in the United States. 2/3 of all Americans are overweight. 1/3 of Americans are obese, and this represents a financial crisis for the future that's beyond whatever. Okay, so in California does it better, sort of. That's a quaint little strawberry field in the upper left. Yeah, it's the same back there. That's an almond grove in the upper right. No, it's strawberries in the lower left, and it's something else in the upper left. It doesn't really matter. Something like 85% of all the lettuce consumed in this country is grown in the Salinas Valley, the salad bowl of the United States. And it's, healthier food than hogs and high fructose corn syrup, but they use Roundup, they use lots of pesticides. And then the other thing that people don't think about is they are really far from markets. So more than half of the stuff grown in the Salinas Valley is sold to people who live on east of the Mississippi River. And it is a fact that 2/3 of all the vegetables, the leafy green vegetables grown in California, spoil before they get to the consumer. And it's all driven in trucks, and you can sort of think about it. So why do we do this? Oh, there must not be any alternative, right? Well, there are a lot of alternatives. So first of all, if you want to make ethanol, if you're stuck on ethanol, make it from weeds. If you take abandoned land, abandoned prairie land, you mow it so you don't dig up the soil, and you harvest that and you turn it into ethanol, you get something like 95% the same productivity with no watering, no pesticides, and no fertilizer, so you make more money doing it. Perennial borders along fields catch most of the nutrients, and they increase biodiversity dramatically, and you can see all of that summarized in the upper right. We know how to do this. We've known this for decades, but we don't do it. And then there's this amazing place called the Rodale Institute in Pennsylvania. For more than 20 years, they've been doing large-scale field experiments, like you see in the left, comparing conventional agriculture with all the poisons and stuff with organic agriculture of corn, and they get comparable production without using all that stuff. And then because we like to eat salad in New York, this thing on the right is just amazing. That picture is from the inside of an abandoned steel sheet metal plant in the slums of Newark, New Jersey. And in that factory, they produce the equivalent of 130 acres of well-managed organic farm. And the stuff is really good, it's really tasty, and they're about to break even. And their major backer is Goldman Sachs. So you gotta figure that they've got a business plan that's gonna work. So why aren't we doing this, right? The answer is obvious. DuPont, that makes the chemicals, and the people who make the GMO corn. We are not doing this because of corruption and subsidies, period. The only impediment to sustainability in American agriculture is lobbying by agribusiness and subsidy. So, okay, now it gets a little harder about sea level rise. So just contemplate that picture. What you're looking at from the air is somewhere along the Mississippi Delta. And the two things that stand out to me when I look at that picture is one, that there's a whole lot of water compared to the land, and two, there are all these straight lines. What are all those straight lines? Those straight lines are where the oil and gas industry dug canals in order to prospect for oil and gas. Now, the thing about that is that those canals are like a cancerous tumor. If you fly over the Mississippi Delta, and I forgot to put that picture in the talk, I'm sorry. You fly over it, Steve and I, we both had the same thought at the same time. It looks exactly like a cancerous lung. And all those holes are the tumors in the lung. And so you start out, you make a little hole for a little canal for oil and gas. Well, it gets wider, and it gets wider, and it gets wider. And so before you know it, you have more water than you have land, because this is a runaway process. And it's a catastrophe. The delta is disappearing. The delta is disappearing at the rate of a football field an hour. An hour. The delta will be gone. Gone, completely gone. That we will have to redraw the map of the United States in 50 years. The delta is sinking 4 times faster than most places on the planet. And the reason for that is sort of threefold. One of them is nutrient pollution. All that nutrient coming down from the Corn Belt weakens the roots of the marsh plants because they don't have to make big roots because there's all that nitrogen. I've already told you about how the levees and the canals are causing all this massive erosion. The Army Corps of Engineers doesn't help. The lower left is the Mr. Go Canal that was dug by the Corps on a boondoggle, that it was obsolete when it was finished. The reason all the people died in the 9th Ward during Hurricane Katrina was because of Mr. Go, which opened up access for the water to come up the Mr. Go Canal and go down the shipping thing into the 9th Ward and instantly kill all those people. And what you see, that big straight structure, is the multi-billion-dollar barrier the Corps put in to correct the problem they created by making Mr. Go in the first place. And that's that book, Catastrophe in the Making, which for any lawyers in the room is a really interesting book. Because the Army Corps' success rate, Army Corps is batting 0 for New Orleans. They have not had a success. I mean, it's incredible. And then the other thing that's going on is that think of all the oil and gas we've taken out and all the water we've pumped out. Well, nature abhors a vacuum. You take all that fluid out, what's going to happen? The land goes boom, like that. So relative sea level rise on the Mississippi Delta is 4 times faster than it is practically anywhere. And then look at the picture in the lower right. What's wrong with that picture? And you say, anybody sort of want to guess? That church, that's the big church in New Orleans. Where's the door? You can't see the door. Why can't you see the door? You can't see the door because New Orleans is 15 feet below the Mississippi River. Why is it so low? Because we built levees. And when you build a levee, the riverbed comes up. So then you build higher levees, and the riverbed comes up even more. There was a flood in the Great Mississippi Flood. It's an amazing book, Rising Tide, up there with Cadillac Desert. It's one of the greatest environmental books ever written. And in the 20s, the Great Mississippi Flood, one of the greatest natural disasters in the United States, it flooded most of the land in Alabama and Mississippi. I mean, it was Arkansas. It was an extraordinary catastrophe because the levee burst. Okay, sea level's going to rise somewhere between 1 and 2 meters by 2100. Okay, and this is a very important graph on the top because what it's showing, which NOAA never did before, is it put error bars on it. And what they're admitting is, it's more likely going to be a little less, but we can't really say, and it might be really huge. Now, Zillow, I think most of you probably know what Zillow is. They are not an environmental organization, right? They want to sell you houses or help you sell your houses. So Zillow did an analysis, and they concluded that 300 cities in the United States would lose half their homes. By 2100, 30 cities would completely disappear underwater. We're not talking little towns, cities. And 1 in 8 Florida homes would be completely underwater. That's assuming only 2 meters of a meter of sea level rise. Okay, so how come this is happening? How come we're uncertain? This picture says it all. All of those great projections of the IPCC about sea level rise are based on what we know. They're really good scientists. They're very cautious. But something like 85% of all the fresh water in the world is in the Greenland ice cap and in Antarctica. And the dynamics of that are really complicated. And we can only guess what's going on. So they said, okay, we can't include it in the analysis. Okay? But look at the left. Look at I hope you can read that. Ice loss in 2 decades. So in Greenland between 1992 and 2001, Greenland lost 34 gigatons, 34 million tons per year of ice. How do we know that, by the way? It's from satellites. It's satellite telemetry. It's incredibly accurate. I mean, we can measure to a millimeter the changes in the elevation and the ice in Antarctica and Greenland. But look at the next decade. From 34 to 215 gigatons per year. So in 3 years, we'll have the next result. And anybody's guess, the number is going to be like 700, maybe 1,000. It's a runaway process. And that river on the right-hand side, Rob Dunbar, a friend of mine at Stanford, told me, you cannot hear yourself talking from the roar. That's a major river. And that water is going down to the bottom of the ice pack lubricating everything. So we could have a catastrophe in Greenland or Antarctica, and that would not be a good thing, because then we're talking about 5, 10 meters of sea level rise, 35 feet. That's a lot. Goodbye. And I grew up there. Actually, I think I'm going to try this. I grew up there in the highest place in Dade County, 13 feet above sea level. That's a hard number for you people to relate to. And I went to first grade at Miami Beach Elementary School, just out of the picture there, where Versace was killed. And nowadays, every full moon tide, Miami Beach floods. So in the main streets of Miami Beach, there's this much water because it's the full moon tide. So Miami Beach is spending 25 billion to buy 20 years. They're very open about it. They say, you know, this will work. This is a Band-Aid, but it'll be a good Band-Aid. And then we're going to turn out the lights. This isn't wacky scientist projections. This is the mayor, the elected mayor, re-elected mayor of Miami Beach saying, hey, folks, this is reality. And right next to Mar-a-Lago, there are an awful lot of people very worried about the fact that the ocean is coming up into their yards. So, the last time there was a Category 5 hurricane in Miami, it killed a lot of people, but there were only about 100,000 people then. And so here's Miami Beach, here's Miami. Miami Airport is in the salad bar. And the water made it to the airport in the Category 5. It used to be illegal when I was a kid to live out here because everybody knew it got inundated. B.B. Rebozo, Richard Nixon's buddy, fixed that. It's all connected by a very narrow causeway, and those people think that they're bigger than nature until they panic, so I wouldn't want to contemplate what that'll be like. There are plans in the military to evacuate South Florida forever. When the Category 5 hits, I'll show you another picture. When the Category 5 hits, all of the groundwater will be salt. It's just not going to work. And the same is true in varying degrees for all these places. Now, I live in New York, and I'm a New Yorker, so of course New York is going to do better, sort of. And this is really an important message, and it's really sort of crazy. Sandy cost $65 billion. That's the insurable stuff. It really probably cost $250 billion. If you hire the Dutch to build a barrier like the one at the mouth of the Thames River protecting London, and you put another one from, say, Co-op City to Long Island, east of LaGuardia Airport. When this paper was published in Science, by the way, a few years ago, the bill for, the Cadillac version on the left was $25 billion. Now that's a lot less than $65 billion. Why aren't we doing it? Well, the governor and the mayor, they don't like each other very much. And there are a lot of other pressures on the money, but this is stupid. So that's the Cadillac version. Now, the Fiat version on the right is you just protect all the valuable stuff. You can do that, and they've started doing that. But they haven't bit the bullet yet to do on the one on the left. So New York is a little bit more vulnerable than it was at Sandy while they were all talking about it because sea level has risen this much since Sandy. It's crazy. Wall Street could move out with another Sandy. And Wall Street moves out and New York becomes a poor state. Okay, and then, you know, the really scary thing about climate change is the increase in extreme weather. So out here, you guys have no water, and you're going to have less and less and less and less and less and less. And in the east, we're drowning. Where I live in Maine, there's a 71% increase in the frequency of extreme storms. I don't know if you remember, but an entire town in a valley in Vermont drowned in one rainstorm when 3 feet of rain fell in about 8 hours in this place in Vermont. And in Iowa, for example, back there in the Corn Belt, all that soil erosion is a reflection of that 1/3 increase in these extreme storms that cause all this erosion. And then it's not just, and these tornado outbreaks. I was on the Science Advisory Board for NOAA for 7 years, and that was really fascinating. And we went to the big weather research place in Boulder, and tornado outbreaks are sort of a new thing. You know, these clusters of 75 tornadoes in 2 days. That's a new thing. Heat waves. My wife and I were in France during the famous chaleur of 2003. 35,000 people died in Western Europe from the heat wave in 2003. And the projection for heat deaths, this is a conservative number, that US heat deaths will equal road deaths by 2100, but I would say 2050. And then, you know, if you think of where the oil and gas comes from, there is a certain justice in the fact that Dallas, by 2100, will have more than 150 days a year over 112 degrees Fahrenheit. And then, you know, pictures are better than scientific graphs. So, I mean, Lake Mead and Lake Powell, I mean, that, you guys can go drive there and see it. I guess you got a lot of water right here. But, or at least relatively speaking, you have a lot of water right here. And then the best source for environmental reporting in the world is The Guardian. It's absolutely extraordinary. If you're interested in this stuff, read The Guardian. Send them $25 every once in a while to keep them going. They don't charge. It's remarkable. And this is an article from The Guardian. How long can the world's least sustainable city survive? Phoenix is one of the top 10 cities in this country. Do not move to Miami if you get tired of the snow here, and do not move to Phoenix. And then, you know, these hurricanes are getting more frequent. And this is 2017. So we rewrote this. We rewrote half of this book after the summer of 2017. Because, you know, I talked about the tightrope. You don't dare go too far because people will write you off as a raving lunatic. But you don't, so you're trying to do this balance. So I'd been giving talks to the security group at the Naval War College about this stuff for quite a while, but I was still being sort of hesitant. And then the summer of 2017, I said, the hell with it. I mean, let's just tell it like it is. Harvey, Irma, and Maria, within 5 weeks of each other. The previous record of a Category 5 hurricane hitting the United States was 1 in a year. We had 3 in 5 weeks. We now know that the number of people who died in Puerto Rico is between 3,000 and 4,000, almost certainly closer to the 4. The firestorms that create their own environment, I guess you all know about that because you should be scared of fire. In California, even when I was living in San Diego, the fire department was saying, if you want to build in the bush, that's fine, but we're not coming to get you. Okay, so the damages are measured in trillions. They're going to intensify. You know, now people talk about the new normal. The new normal is now? No. The new normal is getting to be a worse and worse and worse version of now. That's the new normal. Okay, and then just to understand hurricanes, you know, it's so frustrating. We've known this forever. Svante Arrhenius, who won the Nobel Prize in chemistry, by the way, predicted in the 19th century that carbon dioxide would have to increase global temperature by X amount. It was a back-of-the-envelope calculation, and he was accurate by about 10 or 15%. This is high school physics. This is not profoundly deep stuff. And so a corollary of all that is a hurricane is a heat engine. They're born off the coast of West Africa, where when the water gets to be more than 25 degrees centigrade. Lower than that, it can't start. And then it starts this evaporative energy thing that creates the cyclonic storm that drifts across the Atlantic. And scientists have been predicting forever that as the water gets warmer, the hurricane will get stronger because it will fuel this heat engine, which is what a hurricane is. So, oh yeah. Well, so you remember Hurricane Michael? Last year, right? I think it was last year. So it starts out there in the southern Caribbean. That arrow going almost due north is Michael. It starts out as barely a tropical depression. And it's poking along, gets up into the central Gulf of Mexico. It's a tropical depression. And then everybody starts to freak out because they know that the water, that dark color, that really dark color, 4 degrees centigrade, 7 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than normal, is all along that northern coast of the Gulf of Mexico. And they say, oh my God, this is going to be bad. That storm hits the hot water, and in 24 hours, it goes from a depression to a 3, it gets to a 4, it comes ashore as a 4/5, and thank God nobody lives in the panhandle of Florida because it erased the panhandle of Florida. What if that storm had hit Miami? And then Hurricane Harvey, by the way, I didn't put it in the slide because the track is more complicated. Harvey was exactly the same thing. A piddling storm that originated down south of Jamaica, drifted around, got into the Gulf of Mexico, nobody's even thinking about it, hits a pool of hot water and goes from 1 to 4 in a day, then goes to 5, and then dumps a meter of rain on Houston, right? We predicted this. This is not a surprise. We've known this forever. Okay, so now that I've told you all this depressing stuff, I didn't put in this, but I have a TED Talk which is titled How We Wreck the Oceans, and there's this picture of me looking like this, which is, if you ever saw the movie Network, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore, I should have put that in there for a little comic relief. So okay, all this stuff is true. What can we do about it? That's the whole last part of this book. So let's start out with some facts. In this country today, with the technology today, you can build a new plant to make electricity from wind energy or solar energy. You can make that plant cheaper, sell the electricity cheaper than you could if you built a new plant using natural gas. Why is natural gas competitive? Because your tax dollars subsidize the starving poor, stockholders are suffering, fossil fuel industry. You subsidize ExxonMobil. They really need your support. If you didn't do that, then there'd be just no question. Europe figured this out a long time ago. Countries in Europe, this is an old slide. Countries are getting up. Germany is going to be getting half of its electricity from wind power in the North Sea. I mean, people are doing it. And right here in this country, it's really interesting. Georgetown, Texas, did not vote for Barack Obama. I mean, it just didn't. But Georgetown, Texas is on the verge of being 100% renewable from wind power, and the mayor of Georgetown, Texas, who's a really smart, very right-wing man, very smart, the mayor of Georgetown, Texas says, we're just going to expand. We're going to make electricity for everywhere. Am I over? Way over? Okay. So, and Kansas and Oklahoma, it's really interesting. Think about it. All these states, right up into Idaho, you know how they vote. Sort of like you guys vote, statistically speaking. And you're all making money and putting it in the bank from that stuff that you say we shouldn't be doing because you're making a lot of money doing it. And then, there's all the other stuff we can do. I just bought an electric car, has a range of 240 miles. I plug it at home in Maine, where the sun sometimes doesn't shine a lot. And I can keep my house going and my car going from the solar panels on the roof of my house in Maine. Okay. And there are huge commitments being made. In San Diego, San Diego, which is where the city it was really Orange County that gave birth to the John Birch Society, but San Diego was a cheerleader. The Republican mayor of San Diego got together with the Democratic City Council of San Diego to commit themselves legally to run 100% on clean energy by 2035. And they are making progress. They are doing it. And they're expanding public transportation. They're planting 3 million trees to cool the city off. They're doing it. And there's a great article in The Guardian about this, and asking the mayor, he said, the environment of San Diego is not Republican or Democrat, it's for us. And this is what we're doing, and they're doing. California, the People's Republic of California, right, has, you can't build a new house without solar on the roof. And the utilities are required to buy back energy. They can't get away with scamming you. And then Brown, before he went, he signed the legislation that requires the whole state of California to be 100% renewable by 2045. Now, they got a lot more sun than Maine, but they're doing it. And then this is really interesting in the bottom, Xcel Energy. It's a public utility. Warren Buffett is the major stockholder. They did an experiment. They put out some bids for solar and wind power plants. They came back so encouraging that they have now committed to themselves to make 50% of all their electricity from wind and solar. I think they sell you electricity. They're the major sort of Midwestern mountain state utility. Why are they doing it? To make more money. So the whole argument that renewable energy is this tree-hugging thing that's impractical, well, apparently, Warren Buffett doesn't think so, and Warren Buffett's a pretty smart businessman. There's a whole lot of other stuff going on that I don't want to go into in big detail. There was a fascinating meeting convened at Yale a year and a half ago by John Kerry with lightweights like Jerry Brown and Michael Bloomberg and the whole Texas mafia and all the rest of it, saying, hey folks, the big man's a moron. This is really bad for us. We want to make money. We can fix this for $250 billion. We can afford that, so let's do it. So there are things happening, but I don't really know how far they're going. So I'm just going to put that tease out there that smart business, the smart business thing to do is to go green. You'll make more money that way besides having a nicer environment and maybe not drowning quite so rapidly the coast of the United States. Okay, so I'm done. There are all these huge challenges that are sort of existential. I think we have to sort of keep them to the side. I think it's very important we think in terms of the last slide, that we think about all these things we can do. But there are some existential challenges. This is where the war college came in for me. How fast can we convert? It's sort of like electric cars. I'm one of these people who drove a car for 20 years. It was time to buy a new car. But, there are all these cars. It's actually energetically stupid to throw them away because you spent all that energy to make the cars. So there's a transition time. How quickly can we do that? In Norway, where the sun hardly shines, by the way, half of all the cars are electric, which is sort of interesting since they have all that oil. Okay, how much more extreme weather And sea level rise is already locked into the system. There's an inertia in the system. It will get worse. We can make it better by doing all this stuff, but we're going to have more pain in the process. How much more pain are we going to have? We don't know. Okay, and then this is really where the War College came in. Can we tamp down, can we modulate the global conflict and mass migrations due to climate change? I mean, what do you think the wars in Iraq and whatever are about? They're about water. They're about famine. Egypt, the same thing. North Africa, all the wars in those countries below the Mediterranean coast in North Africa, those are environmental wars. And whatever. And then to be more optimistic, somebody should have a prize for $25 billion to the person who figures out how to scrub carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere to scale. You can do it in a high school chemistry class. The problem is you got to do it on the scale of the entire Earth. But we should be working on that too. Thank you very much. Sorry. I just want to read you this. It's the beginning of the epilogue. And it's very short, because I think it sums it all up. So this is a quote. "We are like tenant farmers chopping down the fence around our house for fuel, when we should be using nature's inexhaustible sources of energy, sun, wind, and tide. I put my money on the sun and solar energy. What a source of power. I hope we don't have to wait until oil and coal run out before we tackle that." A letter, Thomas Edison to Henry Ford, 1931. Thanks. Those guys were smart. Anyway, questions?
Please use the mic.
Yeah, do. Come on. Knock me down.
So mine is more of a comment, kind of talking about when you're talking about agriculture, water usage, Roundup usage and stuff like that. So I've heard overall lawns account for a good percentage of maybe more than even wheat and some of this corn, and everybody waters their lawns, every 2 or 3 days, puts a lot of nitrogen-based fertilizer on there. And just kind of going along with what you were saying, that seems something we could maybe...
So I would question how big a percentage it is, but it's a problem. It's very interesting to contrast Phoenix, the city that waits to die, with Albuquerque, which, is different politically. Albuquerque banned lawns.
Sure.
I mean, it's sort of the smart thing to do. And and in San Diego, when I lived in San Diego, right in La Jolla, where everybody had all these lawns, there was this great movement. About the same time as neighborhood gardens, it became the fad to rip up your grass.
Sure.
And plant desert plants, And then they had to worry about protecting Anza Borrego because people were going out. And you can buy them in nurseries, right? I mean, and give somebody some money. So these things are very important, even though I don't think they're the lion's share. By the way, the biggest use of water in California is not almonds and strawberries and whatever. It's cattle. It's growing the hay for the cattle to make the milk we don't need to make in California, because Michigan, that used to produce most of our milk, and Wisconsin and even Maine, we have lots of water. And so we have surplus water, and we can grow all the hay in the world to feed all those cows to make all that milk. It's stupid to make milk in California, except for local,
Sure.
Whatever.
Thanks.
Yeah, sure. It's too bad you have to come up to the microphone. I know, it takes energy. Yeah.
I'll ask a question that I afraid doesn't have an answer. But there's a lot of law scholars in the room too that maybe you can come up with answers as well. Hearing your description, it's like, okay, so we just have to pull the subsidies from the oil and gas and coal, right? It's that simple. So how does one go about that, especially given the amount of revenue that comes to the federal government through oil and gas?
I would say that, first of all, it's not a simple problem. It's just like the car problem. But Bloomberg and Jerry Brown thought it was a doable problem. And the problem is that we're not even trying to do it. We're not even trying to explore it. Europe seems to be handling it, but of course they don't have a lot of oil and gas. Russia does, and they want to keep selling it. I mean, we have to work these things out. There's no question, but we're not trying. I think that, and God, we were so close, 2.5 years ago. I was in the White House 6 months before the end of the Obama administration, talking about sort of final things that could be done. There was a big group of us, and the great expectation was it was going to ratchet up to the next level. There are a lot of people with a lot of ideas about how to do that, and we obviously need that conversation. And just as, so I've done a lot of work on fishing, and I get really angry, even though, maybe 3/4 of the fishermen in the world hate my guts, but I get really angry when I hear people say, well, tough luck to the fishermen, go find something else to do. You can't do that. You have to, there's some sort of social responsibility. Same thing with the coal miners. Vilifying coal miners is sort of obscene. I mean, these people, they're trapped, this is their livelihood. So part of the conversion to clean energy includes how do you deal with the coal miners. But there's an amazing program. I chaired a session at the Earth Optimism Summit at the symposium a year ago, and there's a guy in West Virginia who set up a nonprofit training coal miners to do all these amazing different jobs, and he's very successful. And we need to do those things. Now, it's a little hard for me to work up a lot of sympathy for the stockholders of ExxonMobil. I think they may just have to deal with it, right? But the people who work in the oil and gas industry, the roughnecks and all of them, we need to find some alternative livelihood for them. So, yeah, that's why it's hard. But we have to do it. We have to talk about it. Okay. Lizzie.
Hi, you're great, of course. You brought up fisheries, and I don't know much about fisheries, but it seems like that might be a really easy fixable thing, the international fishing, because they already have to keep track of how much they catch. If you just sort of put some restrictions, I mean, they have to be global. It just
well,
seems
yes
like
and no.
I mean, again, it's...
So come to my talk this afternoon. But I'll give you sort of one little teaser about it. I mean, remember, a huge portion of the ocean is in exclusive economic zones. So, and for all its problems, the U.S. fisheries policy has evolved dramatically in the right direction. We're doing a much better job than we were before, which is why I still eat fish, because I buy the fish from the fishing industries that are really trying to be more responsible. But okay, 60% of the ocean is the high seas. Freedom of the seas. There is a movement started in law schools and environmental departments about closing the high seas. The initial reaction was sort of like the reaction to how do you stop the subsidies, until people started reading it. And so there was a meeting at NYU about 3 years ago, organized by a woman named Jennifer Jaquette, who's a really, really interesting environmental person. and co-sponsored with the law school, and I was at that meeting, and the result of it was we had a special issue of of Science Advances on the high seas. It turns out that almost none of the important fish stocks live exclusively on the high seas. I mean, there are all those big bluefin tuna that are worth $1 million a fish that they catch, in the center of the Pacific, but it is less than 2% of the global fish catch. Not only that, there are either the species that are entirely in the coastal zone, so therefore in exclusive economic zones, or they straddle. They go back and forth. So a bunch of people, including, most interestingly to me, a Nigerian economist named Rashid Sumaila, who just won the Volvo Prize, Environmental Prize, have shown that if you close the high seas completely to fishing, fisheries stocks would increase, and we'd have as much or more food. There are winners and losers. Who are the losers? With two exceptions, they're really rich countries who just have the money to be able to go out there and catch that $1 million tuna. Well, screw them, And so, and you increase global equity, you decrease inequity by 50%. I mean, it's a no-brainer. I like these low-hanging fruit things. I like fixing agriculture because that's not nearly as big a problem as fixing the subsidies to oil and gas. I like fixing fisheries because that's not nearly as big a problem as some of the other things. And we're moving in the right direction. There's a big UN meeting going on now. I know the UN never decides anything, but actually they do. And I'll make you a prediction. In 10 years, we will be regulating the high seas, and we will be banning destructive fishing on the high seas, and we will be enforcing it. So and it's very important to emphasize those things that we can do. If this were the afternoon, I'd say, yeah, go.
Battery capacity.
Good question.
Brief reference in your material, but you didn't really talk about that.
No, because I talked too long anyway. But
Nuclear is.
Well, nuclear, I say don't go there because we do not know how to deal with the waste. And oh my God, my co-author was one of the people exposing that the San Onofre power plant in the California coast is like waiting to blow up. And they almost had a very serious accident. We do not want to go there. We do not know what to do with the waste. They're going to totally destroy, Utah by filling Utah with the waste or something, or Nevada. But aside from that, remind me of your question, batteries. So thank God for Elon Musk, because the most important thing that Tesla is doing is batteries. I don't think I need to install a battery in my house in Maine, making it personal, because I can go back and forth to the grid. That'll get me through February and March. But let's say I'm a survivalist and I want to be really independent.
But does the grid need that same capacity?
Yeah. Well, to the extent, this is a great question. It's a whole other conversation, but it's a really great question because, we have this the whole country has to be jointly wired, so half of our electricity goes up in smoke because of all the loss in power. And, AC versus DC transmission, and there's just a mountain of interesting stuff there. Somewhere there's a magic balance trade-off between relatively more regional electricity production rather than totally national, but trading off on how much you need to use batteries. But the capacity is there. I mean, Musk is still working on his power plant, which he says can provide 1/10 of the electricity demand of the United States. And oh my God, I hope he's right. I mean, he's a crazy lunatic, but seems to be He seems to be pretty damn smart. I mean, if he wants to put a Tesla in space, let him put a Tesla in space. If he can give us the battery, I'm all for him, you know? But battery power, and then there's nasty stuff in those batteries. If we're really honest about it, it's not all smooth sailing. But it's a great question. But I should put a slide about that in my talk because it's an example of the kinds of constructive conversations we have to move in that direction. If this were the afternoon, I'd say I need a martini, but I don't because I need to give another talk. Well, no, but I have to give another talk. Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm actually from Iowa, and
I think they want you to speak in a microphone because there are people who can't hear you. Sorry.
Okay, so I grew up in Iowa, and of course the plow is really what tore up all of our prairie grass that held our soil in place, and so this has been a long time coming. So especially in parts of Iowa, you have an environmental crisis. On top of that, you're starting to have an economic crisis in the rural areas, and now, especially after the last election, we have a political crisis.
You have what?
A political crisis.
Right.
Because people are lying to them and saying, no, we're going to do all these things for you, but yet in our rural areas across the country, we have just soaring unemployment and soaring poverty. And so how do we deal with those different challenges that are just layering themselves?
So something I brushed under the rug is green agriculture, which does not even mean organic necessarily, but just sustainable agriculture, which is a little bit more labor intensive, but that's sort of good for the unemployment problem. And it does produce higher quality food. And places like that Rodale Institute, or actually the Leopold Center in Iowa, which the state, by the way, decided to shut down, have shown us how to do that for a long time. So again, it's a conversation, but there's no reason. Iowa used to produce a huge proportion of the fruits and vegetables eaten in the United States. It could go back to doing that. But people need the help to retool. And then you have to do something about all those greedy people who mortgage themselves up to their eyeballs to plant more corn when corn hit $5 a bushel. Well, it ain't doing that anymore, and those ethanol plants are moving out. And they just leave the bankrupt people behind. So much for the generosity of agribusiness.
It really is the most.
Iowa is a little laboratory
Yeah.
of it all, and thank you for bringing it up. But it will happen, and I guess it'll happen in the political process.
I hope so.
Well, a whole lot of Americans got a smaller tax refund than they expected this year already. That's going to have something to say too. Okay?
All right, let's thank Jeremy.
Thank you very much. And if you want to buy a few books, they're out there. But so it goes. Okay. TG.
Wasn't showing up.